Greetings, everyone. Koku here. Just wanted to hop on real quick before we started the show, just to kind of remind everyone where we're at with this reading of Nation Building. So today's show is going to start off with the Holocaust of African enslavement. But prior to that, we actually went through the curricular fields for this African Centered curriculum. And it really does make sense. It's based off of the 5 domains that we discussed about 2 episodes back, but it really shows you the wholeness of what a curriculum should look like. And a part of the curriculum that we discussed, these curricular fields that we discussed, was the enslavement of Africans, or the Holocaust of Africans. And so I think from today's start, we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth the Holocaust of Africans. But just to remind you, I mean, this curricula covers like the socio-political and economic areas of political science, business, and economic development. We have technology. Technology includes all the STEM fields like mathematics, science, computer science, functional skills, and then that final domain was nation building, which was the practical applications of everything else that you learn. So again, it shows you this holistic curriculum, and it shows you the goal of the curriculum. It's ultimately to develop these skills and have this knowledge and understanding towards being able to nation build and nation maintain, right? So that's where we are. We're going to be discussing Holocaust of African enslavement. We'll do that on the other side of this break.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. We are continuing our reading of Nation Building. We're starting off today on the Holocaust of African enslavement. Before we do, though, let me remind you guys that this show is part of a growing podcast network. There are shows on the network already that you are being invited to tune into.
This is W.E.B with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron, on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you guys tune into all those shows. You know, The Learning Curve just had another awesome episode featuring Rock Soldier. They get very interpersonal, very deep, very emotional. You guys should check that out. Check out the Pro-Black Perspectives. He's doing another mini-series of conscientism from Kwame Nkrumah. He put out the first 4 episodes, four chapters of that. you should definitely tune into that. And I know the Harsh Reality Podcast has something neat coming up this week as well, later this week. So you guys check out the Harsh Reality Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to all their channels. Click the bell. Be notified for anything new that they put up on their channels. And do the same thing for the Bit of Medicine Podcast, too. I have the community tab now. I be putting up polls. I be putting up quotes. Sometimes I feel like they don't get enough love. But if you click the bell and be notified for everything new that I put up, you'll get those notifications of those posts and stuff like that. So make sure I do that today. All right. With that out of the way, let's talk about this book, Nation Building. Let's talk about this section of the book, Holocaust of African Enslavement. While the encounter of African civilizations with other nations in antiquity and more recent history is covered in Pan-African and classical African history, the systematic enslavement and inferiorization of African cultures by Arab and European nations demands special attention. Like most of African history, the Holocaust of African enslavement has been distorted, excused, and buried under centuries of academic, religious, and political propaganda. The object of this course, like the object of the historical courses, is truth. The subject must be examined in its historical as well as its moral, psychological, spiritual, economic, and political dimensions. It must be made dramatically clear to the students that the enslavement and dehumanization of Africans by Arabs and the trade in African lives by Europeans constituted the most thoroughly destructive act ever to be perpetuated by one group of people upon another. The role of religion and propaganda must be examined, as both the Arab and his European siblings use Islam and Christian propaganda to justify the plunder. Elements of the course should include the following. Now, I'm glad that before we get to the elements that should be included, I'm glad that they here include Arab enslavement of Africa. Oftentimes we get caught up, those of us in the West especially, we're caught up on the Christianity thing, but the Islam thing ain't no good for us either. Right? And history shows it. But again, because of the propaganda, because of the mindset of the religious, how religion works in the mind, most people will say that, well, we did something against our Most High, or it was the Most High's will, or what have you. And I say rubbish to all of that. You understand? But let's see what these elements are. A, definitions and precedents, contemporaneous historical incidents. B, duration and scope, historical and modern. C, psychological and historical predispositions to genocide in Arab and European cultures. D, economic motives. E, African response, resistance and complicity, right? Telling both sides of the story. F, demographics, numbers lost through warfare, capture, transport, disease, resistance, etc. G, resistance and vindication. H, modern legacy, psychological, social, political, economic. I, European and Arab religious, academic, and political propaganda. And J, moral, legal, economic, and social implications. This brings us to a part of the book called Creative and Critical Thinking. Of course, necessary. We need more of it. Each of the several curricular fields includes the area of concepts and applications. The inclusion of this area is intended to provide for the subject-related development of the creative or critical thinking, the core thinking skills, and thinking processes. The assumption here is that the development of thinking skills is inextricably linked with the mastery of subject matter. Thinking assumes that there is something of substance to think about. The objective of developing creative or critical thinking skills is to equip the student with the ability to be discerning and analytical, but insightful, intuitive, and imaginative as well. Critical thinking and creative thinking are not mutually exclusive processes. At any one moment, one is either thinking more or less creatively or critically. In developing these skills, it is essential that the instructor be sensitive to the individual learning style of the student, as well as aware of the unique cognitive style of Africans. Those skills associated with critical thinking include the following: 1, finding thesis or question; 2, clarifying criteria or standards and source thereof; 3, gathering accurate and reliable data; 4, evaluating credibility of data source; 5, defining and judging definitions of terms; 6, evaluating thesis or questions relative to data; 7, detecting bias, inconsistencies, stereotypes, and emotional appeals; 8, distinguishing fact from opinion, cause from effect; 9, identifying assumptions; 10, identifying logical fallacies; 11, making judgments after considering relevant evidence and or sound reasons. Those skills usually associated with creative thinking include the following: 1, intuitive grasp of issue, process, and solution; 2, holistic perception; 3, identification of the unique; 4, flexibility and adaptability; 5, improvisation and focused spontaneity; 6, imagine new uses of old information; 7, identification of forms, patterns, and elements and new ways of synthesis; 8, evaluation and changing process of product in terms of stated goal; 9, change and alteration as a consequence of insight gained from evaluation; 10, contemplation, new possibilities. Subject of technology, science, and mathematics include the subject component of historical contributions, current involvement, and social utility. The objective is intended as a vehicle for the incorporation of the historical contributions of Africans, beginning with the seminal efforts of the African classical period in ancient Kemet and other regions of the continent up to times before colonial subjugation. Current involvement provides the vehicle for examining the recent and continuing efforts of Africans in the field. An examination of the current involvement provides the opportunity for the students to identify role models, as well as identify areas of interest for eventual study themselves. Very, very important, by the way. You got to give students a wide variety of areas of thought, so that they can pick and choose what areas they want to hammer down in the future, or what areas they want to focus on as far as research goes. That's very important. Social utility provides the occasion for the evaluation of current theories, processes, and technology for their usefulness as solutions to problems faced by the African community and their cultural impact if employed. So this brings me to a section called character development. Every time I see that term character, I think about the book from Booker T. Washington. The facts of the curricular domain of spiritual psychoaffective is the character development of the collective and the individual student. The study of spiritual systems and the ethical moral systems is intended to provide the students with a functional set of behavioral standards that is grounded in the classical African system of Ma'at and the related traditional systems. The study of those same systems is augmented with the study of models of leadership. The focus of the models of leadership includes style, vision, political economic environment, ideology, leader-constituent interaction, organizational abilities, ethical behavior, and formative family influences. Given the close scrutiny of historical personalities relative to established ethical or moral and ideological criteria, the student will be provided the opportunity to identify with those personalities to fashion their own characters with the positive aspects of those personalities and ultimately to know themselves. Additionally, the skills of self-analysis and evaluation are developed. Consistent with the classical and traditional African ethical moral systems, and in line with nationalist or Pan-Africanist ideology, certain character traits should be given special emphasis. They include the following: humility, respectfulness, generosity, service orientation, family-centeredness, reverence for tradition, as the ancestors and the elders, person in community orientation, truthfulness, righteous thought, emotion and behavior, studiousness, self-discipline, and last but not least, self-confidence. Definitely not least, self-confidence. The fifth curricular field, nation building or practical applications, serves to position a student as an active participant in the nation building process. That process includes institutional development and maintenance, information gathering, processing, and distribution, economic development, political empowerment, etc. This field can facilitate national and international research, exchange and development programs, and thereby advance real Pan-African unity and cooperative endeavor. Most importantly, the nation-building field makes the entire educational endeavor comprehensive and whole, absolutely. So implementation is the next section. Implementation says the effective implementation of the curriculum assumes capable and motivated teachers, students, and parents. So the thing here is, and maybe they go into it, what motivates? What motivates Africans, particularly conscious Africans? You guys could check. I have a poll up. Well, I have a question up, not a poll, but I have a question up that you guys can leave your comments on the community tab today. What motivates Africans? What motivates Africans? So that's the thing. If we could find what commonly motivates African people, and I notice I'm not saying conscious Africans because then we'll know what the motivation is, right? But just in general, what motivates, what things, and of course it could be more than one, what things motivate Africans? The bulk of those occasions where the student is engaged in structured learning activities relative to the curriculum will be provided by the teacher. It will follow that much of curriculum implementation as a function of instructional methodology or technique. An African-centered method of delivery or instructional methodology is a critical component of the African-centered curriculum and has been addressed in the previous chapter. The previous chapter was Notes on an African-Centered Pedagogy. An African-centered pedagogy, a pedagogy derived of the African world, historical continuum, and cultural dynamic, endeavors to stimulate and nourish the creative and critical consciousness and to inculcate, through study and application, a firm and conscious commitment to the construction of true African nationhood and the restoration of the African historical or cultural continuum. It endeavors to create a dynamic and liberated African personality. Beyond the matter of instructional methodology, the effective implementation of the effective implementation of the curriculum requires a cultural ideological alignment or consensus within the community of which the school is the focal point. The role and relationship of the several factors in curriculum development and implementation are represented by Figure 2. The school leadership itself must be firm in its commitment to the curriculum. The school leadership and teachers must also be personally committed to the central values inherent in the curriculum, which is nation building and character development. It is crucial that the parents are provided with ongoing occasions for curriculum-related and supportive instruction and involvement in curriculum-related activities. Those occasions for parent instruction should involve not only the presentation and discussion of subject matter, but a central feature should be a discussion of the curriculum impact on the student. Yeah, you definitely, if you're going to do a curriculum, an African-centered curriculum, if you're going to do all this work that has been outlined so far in this book, and you're going to sit down and fit in the specific pieces within this curricular domain that's been set up here for us. you definitely want to check back in with the parents to see how the curriculum is working with the student. What changes do the parents see in this young African scholar? Right? That feedback from the parents should compromise a valuable assessment tool in perfecting the curriculum. Additionally, a concerned, active, and informed parent body is critical in confronting the myriad of negative and culture destabilizing problems that confront the student and the entire community. These problems include drug abuse, overt and covert racism, apathy, violence, limited material and personal resources. So we see figure 2 over here. You see at the top, it starts with factors in curriculum development. Then it goes down to African Centered Thematic Inventory, which we covered during the time we've been reading this book, right? Which provides essential societal goals and defines the cultural context, right? Going clockwise around so this is all a part of, or all an offshoot of African Centered Curriculum, right? So there was the African Centered Thematic Inventory, which we went through. Then going clockwise, there's family, early foundations, reinforcement, support. There's ideological themes, which provide thematic and organizational linkage between culture, ideology, and curriculum. We went over that as well. Then there's community, political, and economic determinants. Then there's personal development phases, determine cognitive and moral sequencing of curriculum content and its scope and intensity. And then that goes to, again, going clockwise, that goes to parents, interactive beneficiary. Then it goes to curricular, fields, knowledge base, defines the scope, organization, and content of the learning or teaching program. Finally, again, going clockwise, that goes to cultural formation, comprehension, historical, philosophical, and valuing context, right? Again, you guys can join the Discord. The link is down in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat. And you can pick up a copy of this book on the Discord. All right, so let's go back and finish that thought. Those problems include drug abuse, overt and covert racism, apathy, violence, limited material and personal resources, and the popular media fixation on materialism, sexploitation, individualism, and Eurocentric focus. So yeah, you'll hit a revolutionary matron talk a lot about rugged individualism. And one time she was telling me how Black folks on the West Coast of America have bought into that rugged individualism heavily. Maybe one day we can talk about that a little bit deeper. I'd like to understand that personally. What influenced them to take up that rugged individual mindset so much. In the notes on an African-centered pedagogy, the interactive circle was described as a vehicle for the facilitation of the dynamic and creative interaction of student and teacher. This same concept can be applied to the necessary and dynamic interaction of the several active and interested constituents to the curriculum and learning process. Those active and interested constituents are represented graphically in Figure 1. Inner circle and the more immediate actors include the family and student, the school, teacher, and the community. The constituents of the outer circle define the broader context in which the curriculum and learning processes occur. They include the culture and ideology of the nation, the spiritual environment and interaction, the socio-political and economic environment, particularly as it is determined by the dominant nationality, and the psychoaffective environment. It is critically important to recognize that the school only provides one portion of the education of the individual. That comprehensive process can be described as the process of enculturation or socialization, as it involves ultimately the transmission of culture and ideology, and the perpetuation of the social order. That process is both formal and informal, conscious and subconscious, overt and covert, structured and random. That apparently informal portion of the enculturation process involves a myriad of interpersonal and institutional interactions that reinforce the general cultural or social order in spite of this seemingly random and an unstructured occurrence. The more successful of the African-centered institutions have incorporated the concept of the interactive circle by establishing several auxiliary programs involving the arts, commercial enterprises including food, housing, and essential services, expanded educational programs including adult seminars and summer camps, and spiritual and cultural programs. See, the problem with that there is you have to have some governmental help with a few of those items if it's going to be anything to speak of. Now, if it's like one or two people here and there, you can do that as a people, as a community. But is it the case that, and I had this conversation somewhere, maybe it was Shoot the Breeze? Yeah, probably Shoot the Breeze recently. What politicians have black folks, black community, say here in the U.S., what politicians have they bought? Right? That they can work side to side with and talk about things like housing and essential services and add that into the activities of their African-centered schools. I wager to say none. Plus or minus one. That's the difficulty of that. We have a community. We have this community that's not cohesive. We don't practice economics, group economics amongst ourselves. So how do we get this type of stuff done? It might require us to go back and study the works that others did in the past and try to create some facsimile of it. But this is something that we're going to have to be serious about, or else, the absolute alternative is to just get up out of here. Thing that I always preach is that you want to get up out of here with some skills, with some understanding of what your role is going to be once you get up out of here. And that will come via this African-centered curriculum. So you see, it's a funny, a lot of the stuff that we deal with is circular. It's one thing feeds into the other, feeds back into itself. And so we have this problem. And this is why we're not going to fix this issue with 2 people, 3 people. When you talk organizations, you're not talking 10 people in an organization. You can do it, but you need numbers. You need the people who are willing to follow. But even before that, you need the people willing to lead, take on this kind of endeavor. It's tough. The school remains very much at the hub of this community. The effect is to establish a comprehensive network or constellation of African-centered interactions and connections that reinforce and augment the learning process centered in the school. The progressive dynamics of the traditional village are thereby recreated. These school-centered communities serve as the anchor for broader metropolitan African-centered communities, such as those in Washington, Philadelphia, Trenton, New Brunswick, Detroit, East Palo Alto, Chicago. Interesting, New York seems not to be doing a damn thing in this area. Right? This brings us to a section called evaluation. What I want to do now, though, I want to take a quick station ID break. We'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is W.E.B with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
Make sure to check out all those shows on KWAZ Radio. Also, if you want to support any one show or all the shows, you want to support the network, there's things you can do, such as...
Have you ever considered joining KWAZ Radio? Each of our hosts shares their unique perspective with you. You might have a perspective that needs to be shared. If that's true, hit us up at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
Yes, indeed. You can support the shows by spreading the news that KWAZ Radio is seeking to expand its roster of podcasts within the network. We'd love to get some podcasters off the continent itself, from the Caribbean, the UK, Central and South America. We'd love to get some shows that talk about African spirituality, although some people might push back against it. I would still, me personally, I'd like to be able to tune into a show, a trusted colleague on KWAZ Radio who's talking about African spirituality. I'd like to see, and this is just me talking, I'd like to see perhaps a dating show. Maybe a humor show, right? That seems to be big in the world of podcasts, etc. So you can spread the word to your friends, people around you, that, hey, we're looking for these types of things. Email the network at kwaz.radio@gmail.com, right? All right. That said, let's talk about evaluation. Curriculum evaluation is a multifaceted affair. It involves the timing of the evaluation, determination of the evaluator, the purposes of the evaluation, scope of the evaluation, nature of the evaluation, and the structure or organization of the evaluation. Nationalist or Pan-Africanist curriculum is still very much in its formative stages. Although the independent African Centered schools have been in operation for well over 20 years, the lack of a coherent philosophical foundation and limited financial resources restricted the work on a curriculum model. Consequently, most of those institutions adopted an eclectic approach, which revolved around the subject-centered design. That basic design was augmented by a comprehensive integration of historical and cultural references. The degree of culture or ideological intensity varied from institution to institution, and that's a problem. That's a problem. We want intense. We don't want light. We don't want surface level. We want depth. To continue, the more intense models require traditional African dress, traditional African names, study of Kiswahili, integrated the theme of African consciousness throughout the curriculum, and emphasized African and African American history. The more intense schools were founded by organizations or collectives who were themselves active in the promotion of African-centered culture and ideology. Many of the cultural components of even the culturally intense schools were site-specific and consequently varied significantly. See, this is what we don't want. right? You want uniformity in terms of how hard you're going at this thing, right? We can't have different battalions, some really good, right? Some being a really well-oiled machine, right? Again, we're in war. We can't have certain battalions that are super, super awesome, and then some battalions that are just like an episode of, they're just like the cast of Martin or something like that. Just a bunch of jokesters clowning around. We can't have it. We need to have our weight up across the board. Continue. The less intense schools generally treated cultural and historical references superfluously. The cultural content was limited to picturesque wall displays and memorization of historical facts. Otherwise, the curriculum design and content followed standard Eurocentric models, often incorporating techniques and materials identified with progressive or radical Eurocentric curricularists. Now, you guys who are on the Discord, you'll know that we had that about a year ago now. We had that little assignment where we critiqued one African Centered curriculum. And like I've talked about before about that curriculum, it's a nice thought, but it doesn't go hard. It's not deep. It's exactly what this paragraph just described. And I believe the reason why you see that type of thing going on, I think it's twofold, actually. Before I just thought it was one way, but actually I think it's twofold. I think it's that way because you don't have enough people putting in the work to flesh out a full, deep, conscious, hard-hitting African-centered curriculum. Like I say all the time, if you leave this monumental task down to one person, which I believe is the case in that one curriculum that we critiqued, you leave it to that one person, maybe two people, to put this together, it's going to be superficial. The reality of a curriculum, I used to date this woman who worked on a African-centered curriculum many years ago. And one of the things I remember her telling me about the ordeal, I dated her after she had worked on it and it didn't pan out, etc. The one thing I always remember in her conversation was we used to meet. This is her talking. She said they used to meet like every Saturday somewhere in the Bronx, right? She was living in Queens. They used to meet in the Bronx, put in hours of research. They had different groups that had different areas to research. Like, this is what she is describing is the kind of work you're going to get from the curriculum that was described before this last one that we talked about. Something with a high level of intensity. Because why? You had groups of people working together to figure out every piece of this curriculum. You leave it down to one or two people to do the work, it's going to be general. It's going to be just like what they described here. A couple of pictures on the wall, memorization of some historical facts, but for the most part, it's going to be an attempt at Africanizing a Eurocentric learning model. No good. If you read between the lines, the schools that had the more heavy-hitting curriculum, they came from people who were in organizations. They were tied to an organization. And I've read some of the papers on this platform from folks who were involved in these organizations and started these schools. That's where you got to be with it. That's where you got to be with it. You have to have people dedicated. This is why I always say you have to have numbers. You can't get everybody, that I understand. But you need to be getting a good number of the people that you have, of the people present. Despite the variations of design and implementation among the several African-centered institutions, the design for a comprehensive African-centered Pan-Africanist curriculum will result from their ongoing efforts. The effort undertaken here is formative, reflection of their continuing efforts. It is possible now to contemplate a truly African-centered curriculum because of the tremendous effort being undertaken by the researchers and theorists of African-centered ideology and education. Any evaluation of a curriculum model must establish congruency between the curriculum objectives as suggested by the African-centered thematic inventory and the actual outcomes. Given that the effort here is referenced on the work of the culturally intense independent schools, an examination of the actual outcomes of those programs would serve as a measure of the effectiveness of the curriculum model elaborated here. However, the lack of readily available long-term follow-up studies and a definitive statement of intended and actual outcome does not, at this point, permit that measure. Evaluation of the curriculums of the independent schools has not been undertaken systematically, in part because of the lack of coherent curriculum philosophy. So, something I'll say about that too. I'll say this. We as a people need to understand the business approach to liberation. We need to understand and have that entrepreneurial spirit. One thing you'll understand about business, and this is what makes business kind of difficult for the entrepreneur too, by the way, is when you start to do business within a field, you start to notice within yourself, you start to notice the cottage industry around that field, or the potential, if there's not one already, the potential cottage industry. What happens to a lot of people, they get distracted by all the other potentials, right, within this area, and that kind of takes their focus away, and that's how they lose out. But what we got to understand, what we have to promote is that if we're talking African-centered curriculum, we have to think about and identify and boost, eventually, the cottage industry that forms around that kind of thing. Understand? We have to start to understand that by the time you start talking about African-centered curriculum, there's a area there where you can land as a person who's doing textbooks. There's an area there where you could land and you could be doing research. You can be publishing, you can be creating journals if you feel that there isn't good ones out there, right? Journals that allow our people, those who have interest, to be able to go and read articles on the work that's being done. Like there's more to it too. I'm just scratching the surface. But we got to understand when there's opportunity, there's more opportunity, right? Get into creating this African-centered curriculum, and you'll see that you'll have opportunities to do business on the continent. Artwork, right, etc. Music, etc., 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 right? But we don't think that way. It's about that rugged individualism. We don't think that way. We don't realize that, hey, a couple of people can actually make this the business of their life. Think about it. The intended outcomes, like the balance of the curriculum, will be determined in large measure by the philosophical foundations of the curriculum. The generative theme of the ACTI is nation building. Given the scope of that task, it should be clear that the commitment and energies of institutions and individuals engaged in fields other than education will be required. This is what I'm talking about. Before you know it, if you're really serious about this thing, before you know, you have plumbers, automotive specialists, before you know it, you have the ability potentially to roll out your own vocational school, as well as an academic one, or one that merges the two. Or you could open a chain of schools where you employ, African centered educators and the elders. And I mean, there's so much things you can do, but again, you have to have that thinking, and the group of us have to have that thinking, right? To continue, those students, I skipped something. That generative theme does suggest, however, that those students who can be said to have been shaped by that curricular experience should manifest a genuine commitment to the culture, ideology, and word, thought, and behavior. The intended outcomes would also include academic competence and solid character development, consistent with those traits emphasized. The criteria for evaluation of the African-centered curriculum will have dual components which are reflective of the historical and current duality of purpose that it must serve. The African-centered curriculum must serve to A, advance the African American nationality, its cultural and ideological goals, and B, facilitate fully functional and/or exceptional performance in the white-dominated American political economy. Capability or function within a social order that is dominated by Europeans does not imply acceptance of a subordinate status. As stated in the ACTI, one of the goals of the African-centered curriculum is fostering a commitment to cultural pluralism, with equality and justice, but with a fully developed African nationality as the basis. Okay. The role that the African-centered curriculum plays in the development of that African nationality and its attendant spiritual, socio-political, and economic formations must be advanced with the same intensity as the literacy campaigns of Tanzania, Guinea-Bissau, and Zimbabwe. The role of the African-centered and Pan-Africanist ideology is crucial to the effort to develop a truly liberated African nationality. The success of the campaign to advance a truly African-centered education will determine the cultural viability, if not the actual physical survival of Africans for generations. Figure 3 demonstrates those features and outcomes of the African-centered curriculum compared with the outcomes of the Eurocentric curriculum. The center area of the graphic shows those areas where the curriculum may share fundamental processes, even though the cultural context will differ. So this is figure 3 over here on the left. Curriculum outcomes, nation building outcome, advancement of enhanced African-centered community, strengthen cultural, political, and economic institutions, focus on African development, national and international order of cultural pluralism and cooperation. So we see at the center is common skills, so critical and creative thinking, problem-solving skills, oral and written language competency, technical or professional literacy, and technical and professional literacy, right? And then what's attached to those two things on the left and the right, there's the African-centered educational content and objectives. So it's the curriculum, referenced and performance measures, family and community involvement and feedback, African-centered historical consciousness. I can't even see that well. Demonstrated commitment to nation building and and demonstrated commitment to African-centered cultural, moral, and aesthetic principles. Real small print, hard to see. Over to the right is connection to Eurocentric educational content and objectives is dominant race ethnicity determined, standardized achievement and intelligence measures, civic consciousness, demonstrated commitment to cultural and social assimilation, integration, economic and political usefulness to dominant Eurocentric order. From the right, so okay, so now I understand. So what I read about the nation building outcome, that's from the African Centered Educational Content and Objective. The outcome of the Eurocentric educational content is assimilation outcome, right? Elimination of African cultural reality and eventual elimination of distinct African community and institutions, right? So, okay, so again, let me retrace that. So these are the curriculum outcomes. When you look at the African-centered curriculum, the outcome should be nation building. When you look at a Eurocentric curriculum, the outcome is assimilation. The things that bind these two curricula together are the common skills. You should have common skills in your African-centered curriculum, just like you have common skills in your Eurocentric curriculum. But what you want to understand is which curriculum is better for you in terms of nation building, in terms of power. You might have to thread through, depending on the situation, you might have to thread through some of the Eurocentric concepts, right? If you're not in an African-centered school, you would have to do that. But in your home time or community time, you should be getting that African-centered education, right? We're just going to finish this here, and then we'll pick up next time. Ultimately, the nature of the generative theme nation building requires that the institutions that are charged with administering the nationalist Pan-Africanist curriculum must redouble their efforts and or combine their efforts with those of minded institutions and organizations of culture, business, and politics to develop the community-based national and international infrastructure, physical and institutional, into which the graduates of the independent schools can direct their creative energies. That infrastructure entails the basic framework of values, behaviors, language, rituals, technology, associations, buildings, land, communities, etc. within the African-centered nationality and the Pan-African world. It involves the coordinated and purposeful actions of cultural, economic, and political institutions in the interest of the African population, and it's consistent with the cultural, ideological, or nationalism Pan-Africanism. The desired outcome is that our children will take their place within that infrastructure and propel it into a future of true independence, self-determination. These are the end notes for that chapter. And Davi was mentioned, etc. So this is going to take us to the section on interactions. This is where we'll pick up next time. We'll pick up on interactions. And one of the first topics within interactions are fathers in schools. Should be interesting. That's what we'll pick up next time. Want to remind you guys, support the merch store. KWAZ has a merch store thanks to the Revolutionary Matron. Support the merch store. You know, you can support the individual shows that you like, or you can support the whole roster. Purchase a shirt. You know, like I said in a breakdown, by you purchasing a shirt, you're helping to improve the quality of the shows on KWAZ Radio. In addition, you're showing folks around you that you believe in what we're building here, right? You're showing your appreciation as well, right, of what we're doing. And that's always welcomed. I'm sure I speak for everyone on the network that is always welcome. Like I said earlier, you guys have the ability, share the work that we're doing, spread the word. You run into a YouTuber that you like, who's African centered, and you think that what they're talking about, what they do, will work well on the network with what the rest of us do. By all means, send them towards KWAZ Radio at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. Check out all the other shows on the network. I'll be back on Thursday, bringing another paper, I'm sure, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You guys can tune in to Shoot the Breeze on Saturday night at 8 p.m. as well. And try to be on time. Right? Until next time, I appreciate all of you. You guys be good. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.